Jack Miller had nothing left, his last $50 gone, spent on a half-frozen cabin no one wanted. The roof leaked, the walls groaned, and the wind howled through broken glass. He sat on the splintered floor beside his old German shepherd, Rex, a man crushed by war and winter alike. But Rex wouldn't rest. Ignoring every command, the dog moved to the far corner of the cabin and began to scratch, slow, steady, desperate. This wasn't the restless digging of a hungry animal. It was focused, deliberate, like he knew something was buried there. Annoyed, Jack went to pull him back, then stopped cold. The boards beneath Rex's paws weren't solid, they formed perfect seams, hidden under ice and dust. That wasn't just a floor, it was a cover, and beneath it, something waited to be found. Please support us by subscribing to our channel. Snow drifted down through the tall pines of northern Pennsylvania, the flakes turning the forest into a world of glass and silence. The air was so cold, it seemed to hum a sharp, metallic stillness that crept beneath clothing and bone. Through that white wasteland, an old 1986 Ford truck crawled along the narrow road, its wheels groaning, its headlights dimmed by frost. The windshield was cracked, the heater long dead, and inside sat a man who looked as worn as the vehicle he drove. Jack Miller had once been strong, the kind of man who could lift an engine block with his bare hands and keep smiling through the ache. Now his hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel. His hair, once black, had faded into streaks of gray. His skin was weathered, carved with lines of fatigue that no rest could erase. A thin scar ran from his temple down to his jaw, a reminder of shrapnel and sand, of a war fought long ago in a country that no longer remembered his name. His coat, a heavy, military parka faded to dull olive, hung loosely on his frame. The collar was torn, and the patches had peeled away. Beneath it, his breath came in small clouds, visible in the frigid cab. The only sound besides the wheezing engine was the faint rattle of a dog tag that still hung around his neck, not for pride, but because he couldn't bring himself to throw it away. On the passenger seat sat Rex, a 6-year-old German shepherd with fur the color of old smoke and snow. His ears stood tall, his eyes amber and watchful. Rex had been trained as a search and rescue dog in the Navy, back when both man and animal were younger, stronger, and believed in orders that made sense. Now, like Jack, Rex was a veteran without a mission, carrying his loyalty in silence. His tail twitched occasionally, and his nose pressed against the window fog, as if searching for something he could not name. Jack gripped the wheel tighter, blinking away the blur of fatigue. His gas gauge sat below empty, and his wallet folded thin in the cup holder held only $47 and a faded photograph of a boy with bright eyes and a crooked grin. The boy was his younger brother, Danny. He had died before the war, in an accident Jack still blamed himself for. That loss had changed him, hardened his edges, muted his laughter. It was that guilt, not the war, that had made the silence his oldest friend. When the truck coughed and sputtered, Jack muttered, "Don't quit on me now." He tapped the dashboard like a man urging a tired horse. The headlights flickered once, then steadied. "That's it, girl," he said softly, voice hoarse from the cold. Rex raised his head, letting out a low whine. Jack reached over and scratched behind the dog's ear. "Yeah, I know," he murmured. "You're hungry. Me too." The road wound through an ocean of white, every curve revealing nothing but more trees and more emptiness. Then, out of nowhere, Jack spotted something nailed to a leaning pine, a wooden sign half buried in snow. He squinted through the frost-covered windshield and eased the truck to a stop. The letters, carved in uneven lines, read, "Abandoned ice cabin, for sale $45, as is." Jack stared for a long moment, then chuckled under his breath. $45? Hell, that's cheaper than dying in this truck. He parked on the shoulder, pushed the door open, and stepped into the wind. The cold hit him like a punch. His boots sank into snow up to the ankle. The forest smelled of pine resin and distant smoke, though he knew there were no homes for miles. Rex jumped out behind him, shaking the snow from his fur, his breath puffing white in the air. They followed the path pointed out by a broken arrow at the bottom of the sign. It wound through skeletal birch and dark pine, past a frozen creek whose surface had cracked like a shattered mirror. Jack walked hunched against the wind, his gloved hand gripping the strap of his duffel bag, his shoulders stiff from the cold. Rex trotted ahead, ears twitching, leaving sharp paw prints that vanished beneath falling snow. After what felt like half a mile, the cabin appeared small, square, and bowed under decades of ice. Its roof sagged, weighed down by frozen layers. The windows were glazed with frost so thick they looked painted white. A single brick chimney leaned to one side, blackened at the top, as though it hadn't breathed smoke in years. Jack stopped a few paces away, taking it in. "Well, Rex," he said quietly, "we've seen worse, haven't we?" The dog wagged his tail once, cautiously. Jack walked around the cabin. The steps creaked under his boots. The door resisted, swollen by moisture, but after a few hard shoves, it gave way, scraping against the floor. A puff of stale air met him, a smell of old wood, soot, and something faintly metallic. Inside, the single room was bare except for an iron stove, a small table missing one leg, and a narrow bed frame without a mattress. The walls were made of rough-cut logs, the gaps stuffed with moss long since dried out. Spiderwebs hung from the rafters like tattered lace. Jack exhaled, fog rising before him. "Could use a little work," he muttered, "but it's dry." He set his bag down near the stove and knelt to inspect it. The hinge was rusted but still intact. He pulled a few pieces of old timber from a pile in the corner and arranged them carefully inside. When the first match sputtered to life, it illuminated his face, lined and weary, but with eyes that still carried a stubborn flicker of defiance. The fire caught slowly, the flame trembling before spreading into a dull orange glow. He held his hands out to the warmth, sighing. "We made it another day," he said quietly. Rex lay down beside the stove, stretching his long body toward the heat. Jack watched the flames dance and thought of the years behind him, the war that had turned friends into names, the jobs that never lasted, the towns that never welcomed him. He remembered the way people looked at him when they saw the scars, the beard, the frayed military coat. Pity first, then unease, then the polite retreat. In a world that moved on, he had become a remnant, something no one wanted to touch. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a dented tin of beans. "Dinner, soldier," he murmured, spooning half for himself, half for Rex. The dog ate quietly, tail thumping once against the floor. When they finished, Jack leaned back against the wall, eyes half closed. The fire crackled softly. Outside, the wind pressed against the windows like an animal trying to get in. The cabin groaned, the old timbers shifting as if sighing in sleep. For the first time in weeks, Jack felt a kind of stillness that wasn't entirely empty. It wasn't peace, but it was close. He reached down and ran his hand along Rex's fur, warm beneath his palm. "You and me, old boy," he whispered. "We'll make it through the winter. Just got to keep breathing." Rex made a low sound, not quite a bark, more like a hum of agreement. The firelight flickered over the floor, catching in small cracks between the boards, glinting off a thin line of frost that refused to melt. Jack didn't notice. He was too tired to see the subtle seams beneath his feet, or to hear the faint hollow echo when he shifted his weight. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in white silence. Inside, the soldier and his dog huddled by the fire, two forgotten souls sharing the last warmth of the night. Jack had no idea that beneath that frozen floor, a secret buried for 30 years was waiting to be awakened. Morning arrived without sunlight. The world outside the cabin was a blur of white and gray. The snow piled against the door like the weight of forgotten time. Inside, the small stove had long gone cold, its embers gray and lifeless. Jack Miller awoke with a stiff ache in his back, wrapped in his torn military parka, the sound of wind creeping through the cracks in the logs. Rex, the German shepherd, stirred beside him, stretching and shaking frost from his fur. The air inside the cabin was sharp enough to sting the lungs, and every breath came with a whisper of pain. Jack rubbed his temples, feeling the dull throb of hunger and the weariness of another day that promised little. The world had taught him not to expect miracles. He moved to relight the fire, coaxing life from old wood and paper. Flames hesitated, then bloomed, their orange light crawling across the cabin walls. Jack surveyed the place properly for the first time. In daylight, it looked even older, a shell of a home that had surrendered to the years. Dust clung to the corners, cobwebs hung thick like forgotten drapes, and the wooden floor groaned beneath each step. He noticed faint stains near the walls, as if the place had once leaked memories instead of water. "You picked us a fine palace, Rex," he muttered, voice rough but almost amused. The dog wagged his tail once, nose pressed to the floor as he sniffed the cabin's unfamiliar scents. He began to clean what he could. He stacked firewood near the stove, patched a draft by pressing an old blanket against the broken window, and brushed snow from the table. It wasn't much, but it was order, and order was survival. While he worked, Rex continued to prowl the small room, sniffing every corner with the concentration of a detective. The dog's behavior changed suddenly. He froze, ears pricking, eyes fixed on the space near the far wall. A low rumble escaped his throat. Jack paused. "What's wrong, boy?" Rex sniffed again, then began scratching furiously at a section of the wooden floor, claws scraping against the ice-sealed boards. "Hey, easy," Jack said, frowning. But when he stepped closer, he noticed it too, a subtle difference in sound, a hollow echo beneath the dog's paws. He grabbed a small crowbar from his duffel, one of the few tools he carried since his days fixing military trucks, and crouched beside Rex. "All right, let's see what you've got here." The first pry made the wood creak in protest, then splinter slightly. A puff of cold, stale air rose through the gap, thick with the scent of dust and metal. Beneath the warped plank, a dark hollow revealed itself narrow, maybe 2 feet deep. Inside lay 3 objects wrapped in layers of frost and cobwebs. Jack pulled them out, one by one. A small wooden box, its surface carved with an old family crest he didn't recognize. A thick folder bound with waxed red string, sealed shut with hardened crimson wax. And a military-grade metal case, the kind used to store classified files, fitted with 3 small padlocks. He wiped a hand over his beard, studying them through the haze of breath fog. "Well, that's something you don't find in a real estate deal," he murmured. Rex sat beside him, head tilted, tail still. The wooden box came first. It opened with a dry click, revealing a bundle of yellowed papers and a letter folded with care. The ink had faded but was still legible, written in a precise, deliberate hand. At the bottom, signed neatly, were 2 words, Michael Harper. Jack frowned. "Guess we've got a name," he read aloud softly, the sound of his voice filling the quiet cabin. "If you're reading this, then I am gone. I bought this cabin to bury what I could not face. My brother, David Harper, was not the man the newspapers said he was. He was not reckless. He was silenced." Jack's brows furrowed as he continued, tracing each word with a gloved finger. David was a scientist, a man of conviction. He discovered that the Northgate Development Group falsified environmental safety reports for their chemical plant on the Susquehanna River. They were dumping toxins into the water, poisoning entire communities. David intended to expose them, but before he could, his office exploded a so-called gas leak. The police called it an accident. It was no accident. The words trembled where the ink had bled. I know this because David confided in me. He gave me his journals, tapes, and proof before he died. I was too afraid to come forward. I convinced myself it was too late. Fear made me a coward, and I have lived in that cowardice for 30 years. I buried everything here beneath the floor. If you have found this, please find Emily Harper, David's daughter. She deserves to know. Do not let the truth die with me. Jack lowered the letter slowly. The name Northgate tugged at some distant corner of memory. A logo on a billboard, a news story from years ago, something about a construction conglomerate turned charity foundation. He couldn't recall details, but the weight of the letter settled heavily in his gut. He had seen enough lies in uniform to know truth often stayed buried deeper than the dead. He looked down at the folder. The red wax bore the faint imprint of an H. He didn't open it, not yet. The military case drew his attention instead. 3 small padlocks, corroded by time but still secure, gleamed faintly under the flickering light. It was strange. Each lock bore a number etched by hand, 1, 2, and 3. The sort of system used by someone who trusted no one, not even themselves. Jack brushed frost from its lid. He thought about what it meant to hide something like this, not to destroy it, but to preserve it. A man racked with guilt, perhaps. A man like him. Rex whined softly, resting his head on Jack's knee. "Yeah," Jack said quietly. "Guess we're not the only ones who ran from something." He folded the letter again and placed it back in the wooden box. Then he sat down near the stove, staring at the case as the fire crackled behind him. For a long moment, he said nothing. The world outside howled with cold, but inside, something else stirred, not warmth, but a slow, persistent curiosity, like an ember buried deep in ash. He ran a hand over his beard. "Emily Harper," he whispered. "Who the hell are you?" Rex lifted his head at the sound of her name, his golden eyes reflecting the firelight like small suns. Jack leaned back, stretching his legs toward the stove. His body was tired, his stomach empty, but his mind refused to rest. He wasn't a man who believed in fate. He had seen too much to think the world cared where anyone ended up, but this felt different. There was something deliberate about it all, as if the cabin had waited for him. He took another long look at the case, the folder, the letter, the trinity of secrets left behind by a frightened man. And beneath the tired mask of survival, something inside Jack shifted, almost imperceptibly, a flicker of duty, of the soldier who once believed in fixing broken things. Rex sighed, curling into sleep near the fire. Jack reached out and patted his side gently. "Rest easy, boy," he murmured. "Looks like we just found ourselves a reason to stay awake." Outside, snow fell heavier, erasing the road and muffling the forest's voice. Inside, Jack sat in the dim light, a letter of confession in one hand and a locked case of truth before him. He didn't know it yet, but by morning, his quiet life of wandering would be over, replaced by a mission that would drag him into the heart of a 30-year lie. The snow had begun to melt, but the cold still clung to the bones of Frost Hollow, a small Pennsylvania town that looked like it had stopped aging somewhere in the late 1970s. The streets were lined with brick buildings sagging under decades of weather, and the only sign of life came from the slow rotation of a cafe's neon open sign that blinked with more hope than purpose. The Frost Hollow Public Library sat at the far end of Main Street, a pale stone building with tall windows and ivy that had long since turned brown. Jack Miller stood outside for a long while before going in. He had shaved for the first time in weeks using a dull razor and melted snow. It hadn't done much. The stubble still shadowed his jaw, and the scar along his temple looked deeper under the fluorescent light, but he felt cleaner. His military parka hung on him like armor, and in his eyes was the wary distance of someone who'd learned the hard way that people ask too many questions when you linger too long. "Stay, boy," he whispered, patting Rex's head before tying the leash to the bench near the library steps. The German shepherd gave a soft whine, ears twitching, but obeyed. Jack gave him a nod, the silent language of comrades. Inside, the warmth hit like a memory, dry and faintly sweet, smelling of dust and old paper. He stopped at the front desk where a young librarian sat typing. Margaret, the name on her tag read. She looked no older than 25, her hair the color of wet straw tied in a loose bun, her sweater oversized and speckled with lint. She smiled automatically, the kind of politeness small towns practiced like a ritual. "Can I help you, sir?" Jack cleared his throat, voice gravelly from disuse. Newspaper archives, something from the late 90s. Margaret nodded, motioning toward the far corner. Digital records are on the computers over there. If it's older, microfilm is still working mostly. She paused, eyes flicking to his worn coat, the dirt on his boots. You from around here? Used to be. He lied easily, giving a small nod. Thanks. The rows of old computers hummed like insects. He took a seat, the screen flickering to life, blue light reflecting in his gray eyes. He typed the words slowly. David Harper, Northgate Development, Explosion, 1,996. The results came up fast. A string of local headlines from the Frost Hollow Chronicle. Tragic gas leak kills local activist. Scientist death shocks community. Northgate offers condolences. Promises safety review. Jack scrolled through each article. The photographs were grainy, a man in his late 30s, serious eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, standing in front of a community center podium. David Harper. The same eyes appeared in the photograph Jack had found inside the wooden box, only younger and brighter. The articles painted the same story Michael's letter had tried to undo, a perfect corporate tragedy. An explosion blamed on faulty wiring, a promise of reform, and a quiet burial. No mention of an investigation, no follow-up, just silence. Jack leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening. He had seen that kind of silence before, the bureaucratic kind that buried truth under paperwork and sympathy. He typed again, slower this time. Northgate Development Group. The search flooded with results. Richard Northgate, founder and CEO. Dozens of articles, all polished, all glowing. His portrait appeared beside the headlines, a man in his early 60s now. White hair slicked back, suit tailored to perfection. His face was tanned in the way of people who didn't do their own labor, and his smile carried the confidence of someone who'd never had to earn forgiveness. His company was hailed as a beacon of progress, responsible for urban renewal, environmental restoration, and public works projects that rebuilt the spirit of Pennsylvania. Jack muttered under his breath. Rebuilt it, huh? After poisoning it. Scrolling further, one article caught his attention. Riverfront Development Project sparks protests. The date was recent, just 3 months old. The photograph below the headline showed a young woman standing before a crowd, bundled in a navy coat, her dark hair whipped by the wind. She was pointing at a large map pinned to an easel. The caption read, Emily Harper, environmental advocate and founder of the Green Dawn Collective. Jack froze. The resemblance was unmistakable, the same eyes as David's, but sharper, more alive, burning with conviction. Her age couldn't be more than 35. He clicked the article open. Emily Harper, daughter of the late environmental scientist David Harper, continues her father's legacy by opposing Northgate's riverfront project, claiming the corporation is once again falsifying pollution data to secure permits. Northgate representatives deny all allegations, citing state compliance. There was another photo embedded mid-article, Emily, shaking hands with reporters, her smile professional but strained. Jack studied her closely. She had a determined jawline, olive skin slightly wind-chapped, and a stubborn glint that reminded him of soldiers who refused to give up a fight even when it stopped making sense. Her world was cleaner, sharper. The modern battlefield fought with microphones and data instead of rifles. But the enemy was the same. Jack sat back, his pulse steady but heavy. You're still fighting him, he whispered, eyes on the screen. The sound of footsteps made him glance up. Margaret, the librarian, appeared again, holding a steaming paper cup. You've been sitting here a while, she said softly. Coffee. On the house. Jack hesitated, then nodded. Thanks, she smiled shyly. People usually come here for genealogy, not whatever that is. Jack's lips twitched in something, almost like humor. Guess I'm not most people. When she left, he opened his backpack, pulling out the photograph of David and young Emily, and the copied page from Michael's confession. He placed them on the desk beside the dim glow of the monitor. The girl in the photo was laughing on her father's shoulders, the sunlight hitting her face in a way that made her look untouchable. He exhaled slowly, feeling that same quiet pull he hadn't felt in years' duty. He found the contact section of the Green Dawn Collective's website, an address listed downtown, and a general inquiry email. He knew better than to use it. The moment he reached out, Northgate would know. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a plain envelope. From his duffel, he took a small pad of lined paper and began to write with a shaking hand. "Miss Harper, you don't know me, but I found something that belonged to your father, evidence he tried to protect. This concerns Northgate and the people who silenced him. I believe your uncle wanted you to have it. I will explain everything, but not here. It's not safe to talk by mail or phone. Meet me this Saturday at Silver Creek Park, by the old fountain, at 2 p.m. Come alone. A friend." He folded the note, slipped in the photograph and the copy of Michael Harper's letter, then sealed the envelope. His handwriting was uneven but legible. The muscles in his hand ached from disuse. When he stepped outside, dusk had already fallen. The snow had turned to sleet, tapping gently against the sidewalk. Rex lifted his head at once, tail wagging. Jack scratched his neck. "We've got a delivery to make, partner." He walked to the corner mailbox, the letter gripped tightly in his gloved hand. The blue paint on the metal box was chipped, its surface pitted with rust. He hesitated a moment, not because he doubted the act, but because he understood what it meant. Once that letter dropped, he wasn't just a drifter anymore. He was a man with a mission. He slid it through the slot. The sound it made, that soft metallic thud, felt heavier than any bullet he'd ever chambered. "Come on, boy," he said softly. "Let's see if ghosts still answer mail." He turned his collar up against the wind and walked back down the empty street, the neon sign from the cafe blinking behind him, reflecting dimly on the wet asphalt. The world was silent again, but something beneath that silence had begun to move, the faint hum of truth clawing its way toward daylight. The sky over Silver Creek Park was the color of pewter, heavy and waiting to break. The fountain at the park's center hadn't run in years, its basin now filled with frozen rainwater and the pale reflections of skeletal trees. Snow drifted down in slow spirals, the kind of snow that muffled sound and erased the edges of the world. Jack Miller sat on a wooden bench nearby, the hood of his weathered military parka pulled low, his hands buried in his pockets. Rex, the German shepherd, lay at his feet, tail wrapped around his paws, his amber eyes scanning the empty paths with the vigilance of a soldier on post. Jack's breath rose in small clouds as he checked his watch. 2 minutes to 2. He hadn't been this nervous since the day he'd left the Navy, only back then it was the desert heat that made him sweat, not the bitter cold pressing through the seams of his coat. Across the park, a woman appeared through the curtain of snow. She moved with purpose, her dark hair whipping around her face, a navy wool coat cinched tight at the waist. Emily Harper. She was taller than Jack expected, slim but sturdy, the kind of build that came from a life spent moving, not posing. Her face was striking. Olive skin touched pink by the cold, high cheekbones and a gaze that didn't flinch. She had her father's eyes, that same intensity in the brown, deep, and searching. But unlike David's softness in the photographs, hers carried steel. She stopped a few steps from him, her boots crunching in the snow. "Are you the one who sent the letter?" Her voice was cautious, clipped, with the faintest tremor beneath its strength. Jack nodded once, rising to his feet. Rex stood too, ears pricked. "I am," he said quietly. His voice, gravelly and low, carried the tone of someone who had learned to speak only when necessary. Emily's eyes flicked to the dog, then back to him. "And what's with the dog?" "He's with me," Jack said simply. "Rex, he doesn't bite unless told to." "That's comforting," she muttered, though the corner of her mouth twitched in something close to a smirk. She kept her distance. "You said you had something about my father. If this is some kind of sick joke." Jack reached into his coat, moving slow, careful not to spook her, and pulled out a sealed plastic sleeve. Inside was the photograph of her and David Harper, and the letter signed by Michael Harper. He held it out. "Your uncle wrote this." Found it buried under the floorboards of a cabin he used to own. Emily hesitated, then stepped closer, the wind tugging at her hair. She took the envelope with gloved fingers and slid out the letter. Her eyes moved over the faded words, her expression tightening with each line. The wind picked up, rattling the bare branches above them. When she reached the end, her shoulders trembled. She pressed a hand to her mouth. He knew all this time. Her voice cracked, soft but full of disbelief. All this time he let them? Jack lowered his head. He was scared, he said gently. Maybe he thought burying it was better than dying for it. Emily turned away, tears streaking down her cheeks, freezing almost as they fell. My father died thinking his brother believed the lies. I spent half my life trying to prove he didn't cause that explosion. No one listened. She looked back at Jack, her expression hardening again. Why now? Why you? Jack paused before answering. Because I know what it's like to lose everything to someone else's silence. His eyes met hers, gray steel against brown fire. And because that letter's got your name on it, figured you deserved to see it. For a moment, neither spoke. The park was silent except for the whisper of snow. Then Emily exhaled, shaky but resolute. I've been followed for weeks, she confessed, glancing over her shoulder. Ever since my group filed that lawsuit against Northgate's new project. My phone's been tapped, my office broken into, and 2 men in a black car sit outside my apartment almost every night. Jack's instincts stirred like a muscle memory. He scanned the street beyond the trees. They threaten you directly? Once, she said. A note slipped under my door. No words. Just a picture of my father's grave. Rex growled, a low rumble deep in his chest. Jack placed a hand on the dog's back. Easy, he turned to Emily. You did the right thing coming here alone. I wasn't sure I should, she admitted. You don't exactly look trustworthy. Jack almost smiled. That's fair. He gestured at himself, his torn coat, the boots scuffed from years of wandering, the beard streaked with gray. You expected someone cleaner? I expected someone alive, she said softly. You look like a ghost. Before Jack could reply, Rex stiffened, his body going rigid. The dog's ears snapped forward, a growl, cutting through the wind. Jack followed his gaze to the street bordering the park. 2 figures stood near a black sedan, its headlights dim behind the snowfall. Both men wore dark coats and gloves, their posture too still, too deliberate. Don't look now, Jack murmured, but you brought company. Emily's face paled. That's them, she whispered. They've been following me for days. Jack's jaw set. The soldier in him came awake. Names? I don't know the one in the hat, she said quickly, eyes narrowing. But the tall one is Frank Doyle. He works for Northgate's private security division. Jack studied them. Doyle was built like a wall, broad-shouldered, mid-40s, his face sharp and square, the kind of man who'd once been a cop before deciding money was safer than honor. His dark overcoat barely hid the outline of a shoulder holster. Beside him, the other man, Eric Burns, was leaner, younger, clean-shaven, eyes hidden behind. Tinted glasses, the type who smiled when things got ugly. Jack turned to Emily. We need to move, now. She hesitated. If we run, they'll know we're scared. He gave a short, humorless laugh. If we stay, they'll know we're dead. He clicked his tongue. Rex, with me. Without another word, he grabbed Emily's arm firm, but not rough, and guided her down a side path that led deeper into the park. The snow had turned into fine shards, stinging their faces. Behind them, he heard the car door slam and boots crunch against the ice. Jack, Emily hissed, breath fogging. Where are we going? North fence, he said between breaths. There's an alley behind the old post office. If we make it there, we'll lose them. Rex darted ahead, his paws silent on the snow. A sharp whistle echoed behind them, Doyle calling to Burns. Jack didn't look back. The sound of pursuit grew closer, boots striking hard. They rounded the frozen fountain, the world spinning in white blur. Emily's scarf whipped loose. Jack caught it midair and shoved it into her hands. "Keep your head down," he barked. The wind howled, erasing their tracks as quickly as they made them. A shout came from behind Doyle's voice, deep and angry. "Stop! You're making this worse for yourself, Miss Harper." Emily's breath hitched. Jack snarled under his breath. "Ignore him!" Rex suddenly barked, loud and sharp. Ahead, a shape loomed the chain-link fence Jack had mentioned. Beyond it lay the service road, half buried in snow. He boosted Emily up first, her boots slipping on the metal. Then Rex leapt cleanly over beside her. Jack followed, landing hard, knees jolting. They didn't stop until the park was far behind, replaced by the quiet streets of Frost Hollow's industrial edge. Emily bent over, gasping for breath, her hair plastered with snow. Jack watched the road, scanning for movement. "You good?" he asked. She nodded, still shaking. "Yeah, just not used to being hunted in broad daylight." "Get used to it," he said grimly. "You just kicked the hornet's nest." Rex sat between them, tail still, eyes fixed on the direction they'd come from. Jack looked at the woman beside him, her face flushed from cold, her eyes fierce even through fear. She was no longer just a name on a letter. She was a storm, standing in flesh and blood. He pulled his hood up. "You can't go home tonight." Emily looked at him, realization dawning. "Then where do we go?" Jack glanced toward the shadowed horizon where the forest began again. "Somewhere they won't follow," he said. "At least not yet." The snow thickened, swallowing the last traces of their footprints as they disappeared into the white wilderness, with Rex trotting close behind. The only sound the steady rhythm of three survivors moving toward something far bigger than any of them understood. The night was heavy with mist, the air thick with the scent of rust and rain. The old redwood foundry loomed at the edge of the industrial district, like a sleeping beast, vast, skeletal, and blind. Once, it had been the pride of Frost Hollow, its chimneys spitting fire into the winter sky. Now, it was silent. The walls were streaked with soot, the windows cracked like old bones. Only the wind moved through it, howling through broken vents, carrying whispers of the men who once labored here. Jack Miller tightened his grip on the flashlight as he pushed through the half-collapsed door. "Stay close," he muttered. Emily Harper, her dark hair tied back beneath the hood of her coat, followed a few steps behind, her breath visible in the cold air. Her eyes darted everywhere, sharp and restless, like someone who had learned too late that paranoia could save a life. Rex padded silently beside them, his fur glinting faintly under the beam of the flashlight, every sense alert. His ears flicked at every sound, the distant clang of metal, the skittering of rats, but his body language was calm, focused. The dog had changed since the park. He moved now like he understood they were hunted. The foundry floor was a graveyard of machines, conveyor belts, frozen mid-motion, rusted cranes hanging like gallows over a sea of dust. "This place used to mean something," Emily said quietly. Her voice echoed through the hall. "My father worked here once. He wanted to rebuild it after the chemical spills, make it a model for green restoration. He believed industry and nature didn't have to be enemies." She paused, tracing her gloved fingers over a corroded steel beam. "After he died, they shut everything down. Northgate bought the land, but never reopened it." Jack glanced around, scanning the catwalks above. "Looks like they reopened it tonight." She frowned. "What do you mean?" He gestured toward the floor, fresh boot prints in the dust. "Several. Pairs." He crouched, examining them under the light. "Recent. Less than a day old. Size 11s. One of them's wearing tactical soles." Emily's stomach tightened. "Doyle?" "Could be," Jack muttered. "Could also be anyone who doesn't want this place found." He moved toward a small office at the far end of the factory floor, its glass walls fogged with grime. "Come on, let's check upstairs. High ground gives us eyes." Inside the office, the air was dry and stale. A metal desk sat beneath a cracked window, covered in a layer of dust, thick enough to write names in. Faded posters of safety protocols hung on the walls beside rusted filing cabinets. Jack swept the light across the room and froze. On the desk lay a cigarette butt, still fresh, still warm. Rex growled, low and warning. "Someone's here," Jack whispered. He turned off the flashlight, plunging the room into darkness. The only light came from the moon, cutting through the broken roof. Footsteps echoed in the distance, deliberate, steady, getting closer. Emily's pulse quickened. "They found us." Jack motioned for silence. He moved to the side of the doorway, body tense, hand hovering near the knife strapped to his thigh. Through the gap, he saw a shadow move past the stairwell, tall, broad-shouldered, the glint of metal under his coat. Frank Doyle. The man's silhouette was unmistakable, a mountain in a wool overcoat, the weight of a pistol heavy in his grip. Beside him moved another shape, smaller, leaner Eric Burns, his black gloves glinting in the moonlight, a faint smile visible even from a distance. Jack's jaw tightened. "We're boxed in," he whispered. Emily's eyes darted toward a back window, half shattered. "There," she mouthed. He nodded once, signaling Rex. The dog moved silently to Emily's side, ears perked. Then a voice broke through the stillness, Doyle's deep, mocking baritone. "You should have stayed. Out of this, Miller. You were supposed to be a ghost. Guess some ghosts don't know when to rest." Jack clenched his fists. "How the hell does he know my name?" Burns's laugh echoed, thin and cruel. "Northgate keeps tabs on all his problems." Jack met Emily's eyes. "Go," he mouthed. "Now." She hesitated just a second too long. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness. "There," Doyle barked. The sound of boots thundered up the stairs. Jack shoved the desk over, sending papers and dust flying, and threw himself toward the hallway. "Run!" he shouted. Emily didn't argue. She and Rex bolted toward the broken window, glass crunching underfoot. Jack ducked behind the stairwell, catching a glimpse of Doyle's hulking form entering the office, gun raised. Jack hurled a rusted wrench across the room. It clanged off the far wall. Doyle turned instinctively toward the sound, firing twice. Sparks jumped from the metal beam. Jack used the distraction to slip down the back stairwell. Below, Emily landed hard on the snow-covered ground outside, Rex already circling protectively. "Jack," she called out. "Keep moving." His voice came from somewhere behind her. "Don't stop." She turned and sprinted toward the perimeter fence, the factory lights flickering to life behind her. The hum of generators rolled across the yard. Someone had restored power. They weren't just being hunted, they were being herded. Jack appeared moments later, blood streaking his temple, breath steaming in the cold. "They're not working alone," he said between gasps. "There's more coming." Emily's eyes widened. "Then where?" "Car," he said, pointing toward a rusted pickup parked beside an old shipping container. "We moved before they cut us off." They climbed in, Rex leaping into the back seat as Jack hot-wired the ignition. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. As the truck lurched forward, bullets cracked through the night, punching holes through the metal siding. Emily ducked, clutching the dashboard. Rex barked furiously, teeth bared. Jack swerved hard, the tires screeching across ice, and slammed through the outer gate. Sparks flew as the fence tore loose. They sped into the open road, leaving the factory behind but not the danger. In the rearview mirror, Jack saw headlights appear, closing fast. For a long minute, it was a chase through black woods and fog, the kind of nightmare that felt too real to be dreamed. Then, finally, the headlights faded, lost to the snowstorm that began to fall again. Hours later, they stopped on an empty back road. Emily sat trembling, her face pale, but her eyes fierce. "We can't keep running," she said quietly. "We need help." Jack nodded, wiping blood from his brow. "There's someone I know. Used to be FBI. He worked the Northgate case before they buried it. Can we trust him?" Jack looked out at the road ahead. "He's got more reasons than we do." The man's name was Mark Harris, a retired agent in his late 50s. He lived just outside the city limits, in a one-story cabin surrounded by dead pines. When he opened the door later that night, the years showed on him, tall but slightly hunched, hair silvering at the temples, eyes pale blue and tired. His face carried the marks of old battles both on the streets and in Washington's halls. "Jack Miller," he said, voice rough but warm with recognition. "Last I heard, you were buried in Iraq." "Almost was," Jack replied. "We need your help, Mark." Harris glanced at Emily, then at Rex, who stood silent but alert. "That's not a request I hear much anymore." Inside, his home was neat but sparse walls lined with case files, maps pinned with red threads, a single typewriter on the table. Emily watched as he cracked open the metal military case they had recovered. His hands, though older, were still precise, methodical. The locks gave way one by one, the metal groaning open. Inside lay David Harper's notebook, a stack of property deeds, a ledger of payments marked with Northgate's signature, and several cassette tapes labeled with dates. Harris inserted one into an old player. A hiss of static filled the air, then voices two men. "David Harper, you can't just bury this. People are dying." Richard Northgate, "People die every day, David, but I build cities. You build panic." The tape clicked off. Silence followed the kind that felt alive. Emily's hand shook as she reached for the notebook. Jack watched her, his heart heavy. They had what they needed, but so did their enemies. Outside, in the woods, the faint crunch of tires on gravel echoed distant but growing closer. Jack's eyes met Harris's. The older man's face hardened. "They found you." The lights outside flickered once, then went dark. The hunt had only just begun. The forest was a cathedral of frost. The trees stood tall and unmoving, their branches heavy with snow that caught the dim moonlight like glass shards. Somewhere, far behind, the faint echo of engines faded into the distance. The hunters had lost their trail, at least for now. The battered pickup rattled along a narrow logging path until it finally wheezed to a stop beside a clearing blanketed in white. Jack Miller cut the engine. The silence that followed was almost sacred. He stepped out, boots crunching through the snow, and looked up at the cabin that rose before them, the abandoned ice cabin, its roof half buried, its windows still fogged by the breath of winter. What had once been a place of despair was now the only refuge left. Behind him, Emily Harper climbed out of the passenger seat, clutching her coat tighter. The cold bit through every layer of fabric, painting her cheeks crimson and making her breath tremble. She looked exhausted, her dark hair tangled, her eyes rimmed red from lack of sleep. Yet there was a stubborn spark in her, the same fire Jack had seen in soldiers who refused to die quietly. Rex leapt from the truck bed, landing gracefully, tail wagging once before he began circling the perimeter, sniffing the air. His fur was flecked with snow, and the small scars on his muzzle gleamed faintly under the moonlight. He was older now, but he carried himself with the poise of a veteran who'd seen too much and learned never to look away. "Doesn't look like much," Emily murmured. Jack gave a half smile. "It's better than freezing in the truck. Trust me, I've done worse." They stepped inside. The air was stale, dry, still holding the faint scent of ash from the last fire Jack had made here. The wooden walls creaked in protest at their return, as if the place itself remembered. He dropped his bag near the stove and began gathering what little firewood remained stacked in the corner. Emily watched him for a moment, then crouched down to help. Her hands trembled slightly, but she moved with purpose. "You've done this before," she said quietly. Jack's voice came from behind a low grunt as he struck the match. "Too many times." The flame caught, spreading through the tinder until the orange glow filled the room. It flickered across his face, carving the lines deeper, softening the gray in his eyes. He looked less like a drifter now, and more like what he had once been, a commander, keeping his people alive through another night of impossible odds. Emily sank to the floor beside the fire, stretching her palms toward the warmth. "I used to think I understood what cold was," she said softly. "Now I realize I only knew comfort." Jack chuckled, a dry sound. "Cold doesn't teach you to be strong. It just teaches you what you can live without." Rex settled near the door, his ears twitching as he listened to the wind. Jack tossed a small piece of jerky toward him, which the dog caught midair. "Good boy," Jack murmured. Then he turned to Emily. Here, eat." He handed her half a pack of old biscuits, cracked and stale, but food nonetheless. She accepted them silently, dividing one in half and holding the smaller piece toward him. "We share," she said simply. He raised an eyebrow, but didn't argue. They ate in silence, the only sound the fire's soft crackle and the storm's low moan outside. After a while, Jack stood and began hanging an old blanket across the window to block the draft. "You ever sleep outside in this kind of cold?" he asked without turning. "No," Emily admitted. "I grew up in offices and protests, not battlefields." He gave a small nod. "Then, here's your first lesson." He took a second blanket, folding it neatly before handing it to her. "Keep your hands inside when you sleep. Use your coat as a shell. If your feet start to go numb, you move no matter how tired you are." She studied him for a long moment. "You sound like you've said that before." Jack's eyes darkened. To people who didn't live long enough to remember it. The silence that followed was heavier than the wind. Emily looked at him, really looked the deep lines etched into his face, the thin scar across his jaw, the weary posture of someone who had carried too much for too long. He wasn't just a man trying to survive. He was a man who had already done it once and paid the price for it. "Jack," she said quietly, "why are you helping me?" He hesitated. "Because someone once helped me when they didn't have to. And because I've buried enough good people to know your father doesn't deserve to stay forgotten." Her lips trembled as she stared into the fire. "He died trying to do the right thing. I used to think that was enough." "It never is," Jack said softly. "Doing right gets you killed, but not doing anything kills something worse." Outside, the wind screamed against the cabin, shaking the walls. A drift of snow fell through the cracked roof, landing on the floor beside Rex. The dog rose, sniffing, and let out a low bark. "Easy," Jack said, scanning the window. Nothing but white. Still, he crossed the room and checked his rifle, an old M16, scratched and worn but clean. The action clicked smooth. Emily watched him, wide-eyed. "You keep that loaded?" He shrugged. "I don't believe in empty weapons." The firelight danced across the steel of the gun, across Rex's alert eyes, and across Emily's pale face. The three of them formed an odd tableau, the soldier, the witness, and the guardian. Jack sat back down, leaning against the wall. He looked older in that light, but not weaker, more like a monument worn by time. "Get some rest," he said quietly. "Tomorrow, we take this to Harris. We'll make copies of everything. Once that's done, Northgate can't silence it again." Emily hesitated. "And, if they find us first?" Jack met her gaze. "Then, we make sure they regret it." The wind rattled again, louder this time, but he didn't move. Instead, he pulled his coat tighter and closed his eyes, letting the warmth seep in. The silence settled between them again, no longer tense, but fragile, the kind that forms between people who have both lost too much to need words. Emily lay down near the fire, her eyes following the shadows flickering across the ceiling. Rex curled beside her, his head resting on his paws, his tail twitching as he dreamed. She glanced at Jack, his profile outlined in orange glow rough, scarred but steady. For the first time, she didn't see a drifter or a ghost from the past. She saw a leader, someone who had learned how to survive in a world that had long stopped caring. "Jack," she whispered softly, her voice barely audible over the wind. "When the sun comes up," he opened one eye. "Yeah? We tell the world the truth, no matter what it costs." Jack nodded once. "Deal." The fire crackled, sending up tiny sparks that floated like stars before fading into darkness. Outside, the storm raged, clawing at the cabin walls. But inside, there was warmth, a fragile island of light in the frozen night. And for the first time in a long while, hope didn't feel impossible. By morning, the world outside would still be cold, but something inside them had already begun to burn. The snow began to melt early that year. The woods around Frost Hollow glistened with thin veins of water, and the air smelled faintly of earth and rust instead of endless winter. The abandoned ice cabin, once a tomb of secrets, now stood like a silent witness to what had come after. It was here that Jack Miller, Emily Harper, and Rex had made their vow, and 3 weeks later, that vow was finally being tested. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled weakly. On the small wooden table, a pile of documents lay open, photocopies of David Harper's journals, the ledgers of bribes, signed with Richard Northgate's initials, and the recorded tapes of his voice. Next to them sat Mark Harris, the former FBI agent, who had helped open the locked case. He looked older, in daylight tall, with silver hair cropped close to his scalp, shoulders still squared from years of fieldwork. Deep lines marked his forehead, carved by guilt and stubbornness in equal measure. His pale blue eyes flicked between the papers and the window, where the light filtered in like the promise of absolution. He spoke without looking up. "Once this goes public, there's no going back." Emily stood near the door, arms crossed, her expression calm but resolute. The bruises on her wrist had begun to fade, replaced by the faint glow of determination. "That's the point," she said. 30 years of silence is long enough." Jack leaned against the wall, arms folded, watching the two of them. The last few weeks had stripped away the remnants of the drifter he once was. His hair was shorter, his beard trimmed, his eyes clearer, colder, maybe, but focused. He had spent most of his life surviving other people's wars. Now, he was finally fighting one that mattered. Rex lay near the hearth, his muzzle resting on his paws, but his eyes were awake, tracking every sound, the wind outside, the crack of burning wood, the steady heartbeat of the people he trusted. Mark finally looked at Emily. "You'll need legal backing and a journalist with reach. Once Northgate's lawyers see this, they'll throw everything they've got to bury it again." Emily nodded. "I already called someone, Sarah Kim, an environmental lawyer from Philadelphia. She's handled class action suits against corporations before. She's tough." Jack's brow rose slightly. "And the journalist?" Emily turned toward him, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. "Ben Collins, independent investigative reporter. He's been trying to dig into Northgate for years, but he never had the evidence. Now he does." A few hours later, Sarah Kim arrived first. She was in her early 40s, Korean-American, with sleek black hair pinned neatly at the back of her head and a winter coat that spoke more of practicality than fashion. Her face was sharp and elegant, her dark eyes unwavering. When she entered the cabin, she shook off the snow and extended a gloved hand to Emily. "You must be Harper," she said. "You've caused quite a storm." Emily smiled faintly. "Not as much as I'm about to." Sarah turned to Jack and Harris, scanning the documents on the table. "If half of this is real, we can bury Northgate and everyone he ever bought." Jack's mouth curved in a grim smile. "That's the idea." Not long after, Ben Collins arrived, tall and wiry, mid-30s, with messy blonde hair and a face that looked permanently wind-chapped. His camera hung around his neck, and a notebook bulged from the pocket of his coat. His tone was half cynicism, half excitement. "Emily Harper in the flesh," he said, shaking her hand. "I've been trying to tell your story for 2 years. Never thought I'd get the ending handed to me in a cabin in the woods." "Then make it count," Jack said quietly. Ben grinned. "Oh, I will." By nightfall, the cabin had transformed into something between a newsroom and a war room. Papers were spread across every surface. The old military radio Mark had restored crackled with background static, and the glow from Ben's laptop lit the walls with an eerie blue. Emily read aloud from her father's notes, while Sarah typed, cross-referencing each point with property records and legal archives. Jack stood by the window, rifle resting nearby, keeping watch out of habit more than necessity. When they played the tapes again, David's calm, firm voice clashing with Northgate's arrogance, the room fell silent. "David Harper, you're poisoning people, Richard." "Northgate, you think they care where their jobs come from? You're naive." "David, this is progress. David, this is murder." "Northgate, then call it profitable murder." Emily closed her eyes, the words cutting deeper each time she heard them. Jack placed a hand on her shoulder, solid, steady, saying nothing. He didn't need to. 2 days later, the files were in the hands of Sarah's legal team and Ben's news network. Within 48 hours, headlines erupted across the country. The Harper Files. 30 years of corporate lies exposed. Northgate development under criminal investigation. Ex-FBI agent reveals buried cases tied to pollution cover-up. Richard Northgate's empire began to crumble faster than anyone expected. His smiling portrait vanished from corporate websites. His board resigned in waves. When police escorted him out of his penthouse, he looked smaller than the legend he had built, a gray suit drowning a man who had believed himself untouchable. In court, Sarah Kim stood with Emily beside her, facing Northgate's legal team across the aisle. The hearing was brief but devastating. Evidence was airtight, the recordings irrefutable. Under public pressure and with Ben Collins's reporting spreading worldwide, Northgate's lawyers advised him to sign the plea agreement. He would serve time, pay restitution to 7 families affected by the contamination, and permanently forfeit control of Northgate Development Group. When the gavel fell, the sound was like thunder breaking after a long storm. Emily exhaled, her eyes glistening. "It's over," she whispered. Jack, standing behind her, shook his head softly. "No, it's just finally right." Months passed. Winter gave way to a shy spring. The Redwood Foundry, once a decaying relic, began to stir with life again. Construction crews moved through the site, cleaning, rebuilding, planting. A new sign rose by the front gates. The Harper Haven Project, in memory of David Harper. Children's laughter began to echo, where silence once ruled. The facility would soon house veterans, the homeless, and orphaned kids. A sanctuary built from the ashes of greed. Emily stood on the catwalk above the factory floor, watching sunlight spill through the tall windows. She wore a simple flannel shirt and jeans now, her hair tied back, her face brighter than it had been in months. "He'd have loved this," she said quietly. Jack stood beside her, hands in his coat pockets. He had refused every offer of payment, instead taking a job as site manager, the same title he once held in the Navy. Rex trotted below, nose deep in the soil where workers planted the first saplings. "He'd have been proud of you," Jack said. Emily turned to him, smiling softly. "Of us." Later, Jack walked out to the clearing where the old ice cabin still stood. The last snow of the year clung to its roof, melting in slow, steady drops. He stood on the porch with Rex at his side, the wind brushing against his face. "We've come a long way, buddy," he murmured, scratching behind the dog's ear. "From trying to survive to finding a reason to live." Rex looked up at him, tail wagging once. The morning sun broke through the trees, painting the world in gold. Together, they stepped out into the light, a soldier and his loyal friend, leaving behind the shadows that once defined them. And for the first time, the world felt clean again. In the end, this story isn't just about a soldier, a daughter, or a loyal dog. It's about redemption, faith, and the quiet miracles that still move among us. Sometimes, God's grace doesn't arrive with thunder or light. It comes through ordinary people who refuse to give up, through the warmth of a fire in the cold, through a hand that reaches out when the world turns away. Like Jack and Emily, we are all given chances to bring truth to light, to stand for what is right, even when it costs us something. And in those moments, we touch the edge of the divine, the place where courage becomes prayer, and love becomes salvation. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who might need a reminder that miracles still happen in quiet ways. Leave a comment below, tell us your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel for more stories of faith, hope, and the human spirit. May God bless you and protect you wherever your journey leads.